Tonight, we start with a story of a mother who lost everything, then gained millions. A story about a cold-blooded betrayal. Imagine being evicted by your own daughter, only to find out you secretly owned her entire apartment complex. This is part 1 of The Art of Silence. Get ready. The truth is far more shocking than the revenge. Welcome to Woman Stories, the one place where the delicate dynamics of marriage, motherhood, and betrayal are finally brought into the light. Before we begin, if you believe in the power of resilience and honesty, hit that subscribe button. Join our safe space. And if you are carrying a burden, a story that deserves to be heard, send us your letter. Official story submission email, womenstories@segmail.com. We understand that trust is everything. Your identity is always safe. Names, places, and professions are changed. Absolutely no exceptions. Your privacy is our promise. Let's get started. My name is Eleanor Vance, and that night, my own daughter betrayed me just to keep the fragile peace in her marriage. It wasn't a dispute. It was a sentence. A verdict passed on a widowed mother, kicked out because she'd become irrelevant. I was 60, and I'd recently lost Andrew, my husband, in a terrible car accident. And when I needed her most, my daughter, Chloe, chose to stand by Julian, the man who looked like a gentleman but was rotten with cold self-interest. I thought I'd hit the lowest point after Andrew died. I was wrong. The true low point is the moment you realize the person you love unconditionally is the very one willing to push you over the edge. I tried to be an invisible guest in their apartment. I cleaned, cooked, and did laundry, desperately trying to prove my worth. But Julian had a way of making me feel like a shameful mistake. He didn't need to shout. He just needed to look at me. His eyes always held a chilly disdain, as if I were something he had accidentally stepped in. Julian played a silent game. I remember placing Andrew's small hourglass on a shelf. It was gone the next day. When I asked Julian, he simply shrugged. That cheap thing? I thought it cluttered the place, so I threw it out. I looked to Chloe for a word of defense. But Chloe always looked down, excusing his cruelty as work stress. One Thursday night, I thought things were quiet, but the storm was gathering. I had cooked Julian's favorite roasted chicken. We sat at the table, the silence as heavy as concrete. Julian looked up at me. "Eleanor, I think it's time we end this arrangement." His voice was too casual. "Your staying here is hurting our application for a larger property. We can't keep funding a lifestyle without a reliable income like yours." The feeling was a sudden, devastating emptiness. I turned to Chloe, my eyes pleading. Chloe avoided my gaze. She looked down, then, trembling, she did the thing that shattered me. She picked up the house key, the key I used every day, and placed it silently next to my dinner plate. It was a quiet execution of my heart. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We can't sustain this." He manipulated me. He made me believe this was the right call. I got up. I didn't say anything. I packed my 2 suitcases. I didn't cry while packing. I cried only after standing outside in the cold, realizing that key wasn't just to a door. It was the closing of the door on my daughter's heart. Chloe never came out to see me leave. 3 months later, I was still stuck in a dreary motel. The smell of old smoke and utter despair were my constant companions. Every job application ended in rejection. I thought I might simply waste away in that damp room. I texted Chloe often. "I'm safe. I love you." Still nothing back. One evening, searching through a small box of personal items, I found my mother's antique wristwatch. It was old and hadn't worked in years. I felt a kinship with it. Broken down, out of time, I accidentally pressed a small hidden button, and a tiny, tightly rolled piece of paper slipped out. It had only 3 words and a name written in faint purple ink. Tuesday, 4 p.m., Silas Thorne. Silas Thorne. A quick search identified him. A retired, highly discreet trust attorney, known for handling the affairs of the super-rich in Dallas. Why would my humble mother have the name of such an exclusive lawyer hidden away? I wrote him a letter, explaining my situation and enclosing a copy of the watch and the note. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. Silas Thorne's voice was deep and calm. "Hello, Eleanor. I've been waiting for this letter for over 40 years. There is something you must see." I took the first bus to Dallas. I had no idea that the broken watch was the key to a hidden legacy and the untold story of my birth. They thought they had betrayed me, wiped me out. But they didn't know that my life was just powering up. The game had truly begun. Attorney Thorne looked at me over his glasses, his expression sympathetic. "Eleanor," he said, placing a yellowed envelope on the desk. "You are not just the wife of your late husband. You are the biological daughter of Theodore Ted Harrington." I was speechless. Ted Harrington, the tech legend, the face on every business magazine, whose software company was a global giant. He left you a quiet trust worth millions of dollars, along with some old, low-tier real estate assets he kept off the books to prepare for his company's IPO. I felt no urge to cry or laugh. I just stared at the envelope. Julian said I was a burden, a nobody. But I had just discovered I was the daughter of a tech titan, and I had legally and secretly become a multimillionaire. They took my house key. Now, I held the key to a fortune they couldn't possibly imagine. And I was going to use it to teach them about the power of silence. I sat across from attorney Silas Thorne in his luxurious, quiet office. The yellowed envelope lay on the desk, holding the secret that I was the daughter of Ted Harrington. I was no longer the broken widow living in fear. I was the silent heiress to a massive, hidden fortune. "Ted Harrington was a very private man," Thorne explained, his voice measured. "He never wanted this public. He created this quiet trust, not just for tax reasons, but to make amends to your mother and to you." I focused on one question. "Will Julian or Chloe ever know about this?" "Absolutely not," Thorne assured me. "It's all sealed and hidden behind layers of shell corporations and blind trusts. To the outside world, this money simply doesn't exist." In that moment, I felt an icy current run through me. It wasn't greed, it was power. The power of knowing a truth that no one else suspected. Thorne handed me a list of assets he called low tier. Old apartment buildings, warehouses, and some land Ted Harrington had acquired decades ago. He suggested I sell them off quickly. "No," I said, my voice sounding foreign, stronger, more decisive. "Keep them. I want to start with these properties." Over the next few weeks, my life transformed. I didn't rush out to buy designer clothes or a luxury car. Instead, I rented a small, bright apartment in a quiet, upscale part of town, far from Julian and Chloe's neighborhood. I immersed myself in the files of the Quiet Trust. I studied shell corporations, real estate law, and the mechanics of financial markets. I wasn't just learning how to spend money. I was learning how the world of power truly operates, the world Julian had so arrogantly claimed as his own. I cut my hair and changed my wardrobe. Not to look younger, but to look sharper. I started practicing yoga and meditation, not for flexibility, but to still my mind. Silence was no longer a place of hiding. It was the source of my strength and clarity. My plan wasn't about revenge. It was about redress. It was about forcing the universe to rebalance the scales Julian had knocked over. Thorne emailed me a detailed list of the properties. I checked every address, partly out of curiosity, partly because I needed to keep my mind sharp. Most were anonymous, old structures. Then, I saw an address that stopped me cold. 417 ELM Street, the Midtown Residences. My heart slammed against my ribs. The Midtown Residences sounded hauntingly familiar. I scoured my memory. Julian used to boast about getting promoted to property manager for a mid-tier apartment complex in Midtown. I dug out an old business card Julian had given me with his usual smug pride. In small, silver print, Julian, Senior Property Manager, Midtown Division. I called Thorne immediately. "Silas, please check something for me. The 4117 Elm Street property, the Midtown Residences. Who manages the facility?" Thorne was silent for a moment. Then his voice came back, tinged with surprise. "It's exactly as you suspect, Eleanor. It's one of Ted's old assets, and currently, the management contract is handled by a subsidiary of Lakeside Management, and the senior manager for that site is a man named Julian. I closed my eyes. This wasn't coincidence. It was destiny. The very complex where Julian worked, the foundation he used to boast about his career, the place where he managed the rent that paid for his expensive lifestyle, it was one of the low-tier properties my biological father had secretly left me. I smiled, but it was a cold, razor-sharp expression. "Silas," I said, my voice low and firm, "I want you to form a new company, a new trust, completely separate from the Quiet Trust. I want a simple name, the Phoenix Trust." "What are you planning?" he asked cautiously. "I want to buy out the management contract from Lakeside Management," I stated, "and I want to terminate Julian's employment, not just because of the contract, but because of documented incompetence and gross professional misconduct." While Silas Thorne and his team worked in absolute secrecy, I started gathering intelligence. I wasn't breaking the law. I hired a private investigator who focused on legal information gathering. Julian was so confident in his control that he was sloppy. He didn't know the investigator wasn't just looking for financial discrepancies. He was looking for spoken words. I needed proof that Julian had slandered me and interfered with Chloe's life. I wanted a legal justification for firing him that went beyond simple revenge. The investigator sent back a report detailing conversations Julian had with colleagues about me. The words were laced with contempt and lies. "That old woman was a leech. Good thing I kicked her out." I had to tell Chloe she was ruining our finances to get rid of her. "She's so easily fooled. I just tell Chloe what to do, and she falls in line." I read the report, and anger didn't ignite me. It made me cold. Julian didn't just throw me out. He fabricated a toxic narrative to justify his cruelty. A few weeks later, I received the call from Thorne. "Eleanor, it's done. The Phoenix Trust has acquired the management contract for the Midtown residences. You are now, through a closed trust, the effective owner. Julian will receive his termination notice within 48 hours. He will have no idea who is behind this." I looked out the window of my new apartment. I no longer felt like a ghost in my own daughter's home. "That's excellent," I replied. "And Silas, add one final clause to the termination notice. Beyond the incompetence, cite for documented unethical behavior and slander against former associates." Julian believed his power lay in controlling the narrative and the people around him. But he didn't know that I had learned how to turn his own words into the weapon that would defeat him. The game had officially begun. 2 days after I received confirmation from Silas Thorne, the official termination notice was delivered to Julian via certified mail and email. Julian had arrived home early from a meeting he had deemed wildly successful. I could easily visualize the scene. Him sipping expensive wine, bragging to Chloe about his imminent promotion and the purchase of a larger house. Then the email notification chimed. Julian likely skimmed the subject line. But when he opened the attachment, the termination letter from the Phoenix Trust, his self-satisfaction must have crumbled into dust. According to reports from my discreet investigator, who was still monitoring the area, Julian and Chloe's apartment instantly erupted in chaos. Julian screamed. It wasn't just a scream of anger. It was a shriek mixed with sheer panic and betrayal. He threw his phone against the wall. "This is absurd! Who is the Phoenix Trust? I'm Julian. I'm the best property manager in this region. Nobody fires me." Julian was a man who required power to breathe. He had built his entire self-worth on his career and his ability to control everyone around him, including Chloe and me. Losing his job, and specifically being fired for incompetence and professional misconduct, was a direct hit to the core of his identity. The termination clause included another devastating blow. Because his employment contract included his subsidized apartment, he had only 30 days to vacate the premises and resolve all financial matters or face legal eviction proceedings. He hadn't just lost his job, he was about to lose his home too. Chloe called me almost immediately after the chaos erupted. It was the first time she had contacted me since she placed that key on the dinner table. I stared at the screen. Her name flashed. I didn't pick up. I let it go to voicemail. Chloe's voice was shaking, a stark contrast to the composed facade she used to defend Julian. Mom, I don't know what's happening. He's furious. He says they fired him. A company called Phoenix. Do you know anything? Are you involved? I really need to talk to you. Mom, please. I hung up, saving the message. I listened to it again. There was no repentance in Chloe's voice, only panic that her own security was threatened. She wasn't calling because she missed me. She was calling because she needed me to fix her problem. I knew that if I picked up, I would regress to the old Eleanor, the mother who rushed in to heal wounds, solve problems, and ultimately be exploited. I didn't reply. I had learned a crucial lesson. Sometimes, silence is the most potent response. It forces the other person to confront the void they created. I altered my strategy slightly. I texted Chloe back a single sharp sentence. Call a lawyer. That night, I drove to their complex. I didn't get out of the car. I parked 2 blocks away where I could see their window. The lights were blazing. I could see Julian's shadow pacing like a caged animal. He kept aggressively pulling the blinds shut. I saw Chloe standing in the corner, her hands covering her face. A moment later, Julian raised his hand, making an aggressive gesture towards Chloe. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Chloe flinch, wrapping her arms around her shoulders. Her fear was tangible. I drove away immediately. I felt no triumph, only a dull, aching pain. This wasn't revenge. I was witnessing the inevitable consequence of Chloe's past silence and compliance. I knew I couldn't maintain my silence indefinitely. I needed Chloe to see the truth about Julian, and more importantly, to see her transformed mother. I decided to create a chance encounter. 2 days later, I arranged a business meeting with Silas Thorne at an exclusive downtown restaurant, a 15-minute drive from where Julian worked. I wore a sophisticated navy cashmere dress, a soft leather jacket, and minimal, sharp jewelry. I wasn't trying to look like a millionaire. I was trying to look like a business entity, composed, discreet, and authoritative. Thorne and I sat at a table near the window, surrounded by lawyers and executives. I was signing several documents related to converting the trust funds into investment assets. Just as planned, Chloe appeared. It wasn't because she was following me. She worked part-time at a nearby coffee shop. She was in her uniform, hair tied back, carrying a simple lunch bag. She paused outside the restaurant window, peering in. And then our eyes met. She saw me. Not the weary, grieving Eleanor, but a completely different woman. Eleanor, sitting across from a powerful attorney, signing crucial papers and speaking the language of finance. Surprise, confusion, and a hint of fear washed over Chloe's face. She stood there, wide-eyed, the lunch bag shaking slightly in her hand. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply held her gaze. It was a look of cold self-possession, devoid of maternal warmth or victimhood. It communicated one thing. You gave away your respect for me. I have taken it back. Chloe froze for a few seconds, then she spun around, practically fleeing the window. She couldn't face the reality she was seeing. I continued my work with Silas Thorne as if nothing had happened. But deep down, I knew that encounter had planted the first seeds of doubt in Chloe's mind. That evening, I received an email from Chloe. Not a text. A lengthy, formal email, almost impersonal. Subject: a few questions. Did you know Julian worked for the Midtown Residences? Do you know who the Phoenix Trust is? I saw you downtown. What are you doing? He's ruining everything, Mom. He says it's my fault. I don't know who to believe anymore. I read it. She didn't apologize for throwing me out. She didn't ask if I was safe. She was only worried about the facts she couldn't reconcile. I replied with only 2 simple sentences. No explanation, no emotion. Child, I learned to own my silence. I think you should learn that too. I closed my laptop. Julian taught me the art of weaponizing silence. Now, I would use that lesson to teach them both. Julian would spiral into madness over his lack of control. And Chloe She would be forced to find her own way out of the maze she helped create. Julian realized he couldn't fight the Phoenix Trust, an anonymous, untraceable entity. His rage was no longer cold contempt. It transformed into desperate fury and petty vandalism. He was losing control, and a controller who loses control becomes dangerously unpredictable. He had just over 2 weeks remaining before eviction. Reports from the new property manager, hired by the Phoenix Trust, began flooding into Silas Thorne's office. Julian was using his intimate knowledge of the building's systems to wreak havoc. Week 1. The heating system suddenly failed on a cold night. A valve had been expertly misaligned. Week 2. He sent anonymous, vaguely threatening emails to the new manager, accusing the new owner of being a market manipulator. Week 3. Elevator doors repeatedly jammed, causing significant frustration among residents. Julian was targeting innocent people, and that forced my hand. My retribution was never about inflicting harm. It was about restoring order. "Silas," I instructed over the phone, "I want you to increase security, install discrete legal cameras in common areas for safety, and notify all residents that the Phoenix Trust is implementing comprehensive maintenance and security upgrades." I also told my private investigator to focus his surveillance on Julian and Chloe's relationship inside the apartment. I knew a man stripped of external power would seek to regain it internally. The reports were grim. Julian was constantly screaming at Chloe, blaming her for his termination. He openly checked her phone, accusing her of collaborating with the new owners. He wanted her scared and compliant. "You didn't choose him over me. You chose convenience over truth." My own words echoed in my mind. Now the truth had become too ugly for Chloe to keep ignoring. Chloe stopped replying to my one-line emails, but she still communicated in a hidden way. Social media posts. I had been quietly monitoring her personal accounts. Her previous posts, photos of lavish trips and romantic dinners, were gone. Now she posted only charcoal sketches, entirely black and white. They were dark, often featuring a locked door or a woman bowing her head in shadow. One day, she posted a particularly dark drawing with a short caption, "The weight of silence." I knew she was suffering, but that pain hadn't yet reached the critical mass required to force her to act. Then, the critical scene occurred. My investigator sent me a legally obtained audio recording from a hallway security camera, not inside the apartment, but recording the powerful sound spill. It was a terrifying burst of screaming. Julian's voice. "You ruined everything! You destroyed me! You knew I needed this job!" Then the sound of something shattering, followed by Chloe's choked, heart-wrenching sobs. That wasn't the cry of someone in distress. It was the sound of someone breaking. I turned off the recording. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to call the police, to rush over, to protect my daughter. But I remembered the night I was thrown out. I begged her for a word, a glance, and she chose silence. I had to hold firm. I wasn't saving Chloe from Julian. I had to force Chloe to save herself. I called the reliable neighbor, the one who cooperated with the PI to report Julian's escalating madness, and asked her to gently check the situation. The neighbor texted back, "Chloe's been in the bathroom for almost an hour. Lights are out. Julian just left, drove off fast." I decided to use Julian's temporary absence to create one final opportunity for Chloe. I knew where Julian had gone. He frequented a bar 15 miles away to drink. I had a window of time. I drove to their complex, but parked 2 blocks away. I walked the rest of the distance. My heart pounded. I didn't want to be seen, but I needed to be present. I saw Chloe standing alone at the bus stop. She had no suitcase, no bags, just a thin jacket. She was huddled in the dark, staring at her phone. I approached slowly, my footsteps muffled. I stopped a distance away. I said nothing. I just stood there. 10 minutes passed. Finally, Chloe lifted her head. She had been crying heavily. Her eyes were swollen and vacant. "Mom," she whispered. Her voice was brittle, like sandpaper. I simply nodded. He told me I destroyed him. He said I was a pawn in someone's game. He said I should just die. She finally voiced the raw truth. I didn't hug her. I didn't offer comfort. I spoke, my voice low and steady. I have heard those words before, Chloe, but not from Julian. Chloe looked at me, confusion mixing with her pain. I heard those words from you when you chose silence over protecting me. That direct hit caused her to completely collapse. She sank onto the bus stop bench, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I let her cry. Those tears were necessary. They were the tears of awakening, not of weakness. When she stopped, I handed her a clean tissue. I'm not here to judge, Chloe. I'm here to tell you. I walked out that door. You can too. I don't know where to go, she choked out. I have no money. He sold everything. I saw the bus approaching. I knew Julian would be back soon. I'll take extra shifts at the coffee shop. I'll get a second job. I'll crash at a friend's place. I'm leaving, Mom. I won't be silent anymore. I nodded. Good. That is your choice, not mine. I looked her directly in the eye, giving her one last look. Not of warmth, but of respect. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back as she got on the bus. I had given her back the responsibility for her own life. I let Chloe leave. I didn't turn back to watch the bus take her away from Julian's abuse, or from me. I knew it was the right decision. I wasn't her savior. I was the one who opened the door for her to save herself. After that night, Julian and Chloe's apartment complex fell into an eerie quiet. Julian still had about 15 days left until the eviction date. He was still in the apartment, but alone. He convinced himself Chloe was just sulking at a friend's house. He couldn't accept his marriage had collapsed. A controller never accepts losing control. Julian's madness escalated to a new level. Obsession. He spent hours poring over old corporate filings, trying to find the real name behind the Phoenix Trust. He sent long, rambling emails to attorney Silas Thorne, demanding to confront the owner. He screamed that this was a personal conspiracy. Then his suspicion landed on me. Julian remembered our chance encounter at the upscale restaurant. He remembered my changed appearance. He remembered Chloe's sudden, strange silence. My private investigator reported. Julian was now tearing through my old belongings, desperately searching for proof. He found one of Andrew's small notebooks, which mentioned a lawyer friend in Dallas, and an old sealed agreement. I knew he was close. Julian was about to discover that the woman he dismissed as trash was the one holding his entire fate in her hand. I couldn't allow Julian to remain in that apartment complex any longer. His presence was not just a threat to the residents. It was a risk to Chloe, should she decide to return for her remaining possessions. I needed a definitive move. I had learned that with a man like Julian, quiet retribution had to culminate in a public execution. I called Silas Thorne. Silas, I need you to organize a resident meeting, a mandatory one. Thorne hesitated. He sounded worried. Eleanor, are you sure you want to reveal yourself? It poses a risk to the secrecy of the trust. I countered. I've been in hiding long enough, Silas. I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing this to reclaim the dignity he stole from me, and to let him see that the person he scorned is the one who defeated him. We sent out the notices. A mandatory meeting with the new ownership to discuss security and comprehensive repairs. I knew Julian would be there. He craved a face to lash out at, a person to blame. In those days leading up to the meeting, I rehearsed. Not my words, but my composure. I chose my outfit, a deep charcoal suit, a crisp white silk blouse, no jewelry, save for Andrew's simple gold band. I wanted to look like a business entity, not a grieving mother. The day of the meeting arrived. I got to the complex community room early. I sat at the front table, facing the door, with Silas Thorne and the new property manager standing beside me. The residents filtered in, curious and slightly disgruntled. I saw familiar faces I'd met when I used to live here. And then, Julian walked in. He looked haggard, his shirt crumpled, but his eyes were burning with focused rage. He didn't look around. He walked straight to the front, toward the property manager. "I demand to see the owner! I know this is a game! Who is behind the Phoenix Trust? I have a right to know!" He roared, his voice echoing in the room. All eyes turned to Julian. I didn't make him wait. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. I stepped out from behind the table, moving towards the podium. Julian saw me. He was so consumed by anger that he didn't recognize me immediately. He just saw a well-dressed, composed, unfamiliar woman. Then I stopped directly in front of him. "Good evening," I said, my voice quiet yet penetrating. I held Julian's gaze. "My name is Eleanor Vance." The moment was perfect. Julian's face cycled through emotions: anger, confusion, then horror, and finally, absolute denial. No way," he stammered. You have nothing. You're a freeloader." I offered a small, cold smile. "I am Eleanor Vance, and I am the owner of this building via the Phoenix Trust." Silence crashed over the room. Julian lunged forward, his fists clenched, his face crimson. "You did this! You used that old woman's money to get revenge on me! You made me lose my job, my home!" I maintained my steady gaze. I didn't engage his fury. I simply turned to the residents. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. This is precisely the kind of incompetence and professional misconduct we cannot tolerate. I will take your questions after this man leaves." Julian turned on the neighbors, shouting, "She's a fraud! She used to live here! Her own daughter threw her out!" No one reacted. They simply watched Julian. They had seen enough of his erratic behavior. I pointed to the door. "Julian, your tenancy in this property has been terminated. You have 24 hours to vacate. Otherwise, I will proceed with legal eviction. I suggest you take your defeat in silence." I had used his own weapon against him: coldness and control. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to explain. I only had to be the truth. Julian was no longer the powerful man. He was a defeated man screaming into the void. He realized that the woman he had tried to erase was the one who had just signed his expulsion order. He glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, then spun around, slammed the door, and ran. The board was flipped. My dignity was reclaimed. After the residents' meeting, Julian didn't return to his apartment immediately. Instead, he drove aimlessly, consumed by a rage he couldn't control. He had been publicly humiliated, not by a business rival, but by the woman he had utterly scorned and discarded. He had less than 24 hours before eviction. Julian was convinced I couldn't have orchestrated this alone. He knew I lacked the financial capacity. He became obsessed with discovering the origin of the Phoenix Trust and the real name behind it. When Julian finally returned to the apartment, he acted like a desperate hunter. He ransacked every corner, tearing through cushions and bedding. He was looking for one last piece of evidence. Eventually, he found a small, old notebook I had carelessly overlooked. Inside were a few lines written by Andrew, mentioning a lawyer in Dallas and an old sealed agreement. More critically, he found a tiny faded photograph of my mother with a handsome younger man he didn't recognize. Julian started connecting the dots. Dallas lawyer, sealed agreement, Eleanor's sudden wealth. He spent hours trawling through old public records and archived news articles. He cross-referenced my name, Eleanor Vance, and the lawyer's name, Silas Thorne, with old reporting on Theodore Ted Harrington. He focused on the 60s and 70s, the time my mother was young and Ted Harrington was launching his first company. Hours later, my investigator called. His voice was grim. "Julian breached some public databases and archived newspaper accounts. He's looking at the sealed court records surrounding Ted Harrington's IPO in 1971. I think he's about to find it." I closed my eyes. I knew what he had found. The truth of my mother's relationship and the identity of my biological father. Julian had nothing left to lose. He'd lost his job, his home, and his wife, though he still hadn't processed Chloe's departure. His only remaining weapon was the secret he had just uncovered. He sent an email directly to me, bypassing Silas Thorne. His language was venomous, but beneath it was a triumphant certainty. He wrote, "I know who you are, Eleanor Harrington. I know you're the illegitimate daughter Ted Harrington secretly kept quiet to protect his reputation during his company's listing. You think you're the only one with secrets? You think you can destroy me and walk away a hero? Let's see what people think of you when they find out the truth about your family's lies and how you got that money. I'm going to the media." I read the email and felt a terrifying calm. This was not fear. It was clarity. I had lived with this truth for decades, and now he was attempting to use it as a weapon against me. I called Silas Thorne. "Julian found out. He's threatening to publicly expose the entire history of Ted Harrington and me." Thorne was visibly stressed. "Eleanor, if this goes public, it could unravel the quiet trust and create a messy legal battle. We need to sue him for extortion immediately." I refused. "No, suing him will only make him look like the oppressed man in the media. I will not let him control my narrative. I will not let him turn my father's secret into a weapon against me." I knew the only way to disarm Julian was to use the weapon myself, but for a higher purpose. "Silas," I said, "I want you to organize a press conference." Thorne was aghast. "You want to do what?" "Julian claimed I used the money for revenge. I will prove him wrong. I'm going public with Ted Harrington's legacy, but I won't talk about the money." I spent the rest of the day drafting a statement. I didn't mention myself, Chloe, or Julian. I focused on Andrew, my late husband. Andrew died in a car accident, but years prior, he had dedicated his time to researching assistive technology for rehabilitation. He had to abandon the project due to a lack of funding. "Silas," I told Thorne, "I want to announce the formation of the Andrew Vance Foundation. I will commit the majority of the Quiet Trust assets, 70%, to fund the research and development of that rehabilitation technology." My voice grew stronger. "I will take my father's secret and his legacy, and I will turn it into a legacy of compassion in the name of the man who taught me unconditional love." This preempts Julian completely. He can announce whatever he wants, but the public will only see one headline: "Eleanor Vance inherited a fortune and turned it into help for the community." Julian wanted me to be a petty, vengeful woman. I would become a philanthropist, acting for the greater good. Thorne managed a small, approving smile. "This is masterful, Eleanor. Retribution without a single accusation." I never replied to Julian's email. I simply sent him a blank reply. That silence was my final, loaded challenge. Julian was prepared for a media war, but he didn't know I had scheduled a humanitarian award ceremony. The press conference was held at a prestigious downtown hotel. This was not the kind of venue the old Eleanor Vance would have ever stepped into. I wore a tailored cream suit, my hair neatly styled, projecting an image of quiet authority. Beside me stood attorney Silas Thorne, who looked noticeably more anxious than I was. I had invited financial reporters, charity organizations, and several influential figures in the tech world, people who had known Theodore Ted Harrington. Julian had sent me one final text that morning. "You think you can buy my silence? I'll be there. I'll tell everyone who you are and how you stole that fortune." I deleted the text immediately. I didn't need to react. I was prepared for his inevitable appearance. While waiting, I thought of Chloe. She hadn't reached out, but I knew she was watching. I didn't want her to watch this conference out of curiosity. I wanted her to watch because she needed to see how a woman fights and why silence isn't the final answer. Silas Thorne took the podium first, announcing the formation of the Andrew Vance Foundation, a charity that had suddenly appeared with significant seed funding. The reporter's curiosity was palpable. Who was funding this? Thorne turned to me and handed over the microphone. I felt the weight of every eye in the room. I approached the podium. I looked directly into the cameras, not for the audience, but because I knew Chloe was watching. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice rich and clear. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I didn't talk about the money or the assets. I spoke about Andrew, my husband. I spoke about his life's work researching assistive technology for rehabilitation. I spoke about how he had to abandon that project years ago due to a lack of funds. Andrew taught me that love is perseverance. And when he passed, I thought I lost everything. But in that loss, I found a long buried truth. I took a deliberate pause. Today, I stand before you not just as Andrew's widow, but as the biological daughter of Theodore Ted Harrington. A collective gasp swept through the room. Reporters instantly scrambled. My identity was now public, but on my own terms. Mr. Harrington was a father I never had the chance to know. He left me a quiet trust, a substantial legacy. Julian was right. Julian claimed I acquired this money secretly. I paused again, looking directly at the entrance, sensing his imminent arrival. Julian wanted me to be ashamed of this origin. He wanted to make this a story of greed and simple revenge. At that very moment, Julian burst into the press conference room. He was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, a stark contrast to the professional atmosphere. "She's lying! She's a liar! She used the money to destroy me! She evicted me! She's an illegitimate child who deserves nothing!" Julian bellowed, trying to bypass the security perimeter. Reporters swiveled their cameras toward Julian, sensing the drama. I did not react to Julian. I maintained my calm gaze and continued my speech, my voice growing stronger, treating Julian like an irrelevant distraction. I will not deny the truth. The legacy is real, and I am Ted Harrington's daughter. But I refuse to let it become Julian's story. I refuse to let it become a story about retaliation. Therefore, I announce today, I am committing 70% of this quiet trust legacy to officially launch the Andrew Vance Foundation. This foundation will fund critical research into rehabilitation technology and provide free legal support for victims of domestic coercion, those who need to be handed back their voice. I looked directly into the camera, unblinking. This is not revenge. This is redemption. Redemption for every time I was silent and allowed my pain to feel meaningless. The room fell into a stunned silence, but this was a silence of admiration. Julian, struggling against security, became utterly defeated. The secret he intended to weaponize, I had successfully turned into a shield of compassion and a lasting legacy. He wanted me to be a small, selfish woman. I had transformed myself into a major philanthropist, acting for the public good. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the final collapse. He no longer hated me. He feared my composure and my magnitude. He realized he hadn't been fighting a mother. He was fighting an ideal. He was escorted out amidst the commotion. I finished my speech with a brief note of gratitude. I don't know where Chloe watched the press conference, but after it was over, I received an email from her. No subject line. "Mom, I saw it. I saw what you did. I saw what you said. I saw him. I saw everything. I thought you were taking revenge. But you weren't taking revenge. You were fixing what was broken. Not just your things, but the things we both broke. I am so sorry. I am sorry for all the silence. I am sorry for putting that key on the table. I am sorry for letting you go. I left Julian for good. I got a second job, and I'm staying with a friend. I've re-enrolled in school. I told him I want a divorce. He told me I could never survive without him. But now, I see, if you can stand there after everything, then I can do this too." My tears finally came, but they were tears of relief and reconnection. The fight was over. Julian was defeated not by law or money, but by humanity. Most importantly, I had won back my daughter. Following the press conference, Julian vanished completely. He had been publicly shamed, disarmed, and dismissed by society as a frantic, raving figure. My counter-strategy, turning his secret into a humanitarian effort, rendered all his actions utterly meaningless. He had nowhere left to point the finger and no one left to manipulate. Silas Thorne swiftly finalized the legal formalities. Julian never filed a lawsuit. He was depleted of all resources, and more importantly, he had lost the self-importance required to face me again. He signed a non-disclosure agreement and vacated the apartment without taking much more than the clothes on his back. Julian's departure was not a dramatic climax. It was a quiet, unnoticed end. The controller simply dissolved into the silence of his own defeat. I felt no triumph. I felt a deep, profound emptiness. Vengeance had brought justice, but only healing could bring peace. Thorne confirmed. Julian is gone. The apartment is recovered. He will never be able to contact you or Chloe again. Good, I replied. Now we can focus on what truly matters. I called Chloe. She answered immediately. Her voice was no longer brittle with fear, but calmer, though still hesitant. I watched the entire press conference, Mom, she said. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Chloe, I responded. You just need to see. We agreed to meet at a quiet local park. Chloe arrived with shorter hair and a changed gaze. She no longer carried the look of a woman controlled by her husband. She was a woman who was finally breathing on her own. We sat on a bench, watching children play. We didn't talk about Julian. We didn't talk about the legacy. We talked about trivial, everyday things. Chloe's new part-time job at a coffee shop, the evening art class she had signed up for, and my small plans for the Andrew Vance Foundation. After a long stretch of silence, Chloe handed me a small box. I found this when I went back for my things. He hid it. It's Dad's hourglass. Tears welled in my eyes. The hourglass Julian had called that cheap clock and thrown out. Julian had deliberately concealed it, trying to steal my last tangible piece of memory. I held the hourglass. It wasn't financially valuable, but it was a symbol of Andrew's love and patience. Thank you, Chloe, I whispered. It was the most honest thing I could manage. Chloe looked at me, her eyes filled with pain and regret. Mom, I let you leave. I put that key on the table. Can you ever forgive me? I placed my hand over hers. I didn't offer an easy answer. I had learned that forgiveness isn't just a word. I forgave the woman who put that key on the table, Chloe. Now, you have to forgive yourself. The silence that followed wrapped around us. This time, the silence was healing, not betrayal. Following our reunion, I returned to work. I had committed 70% of the legacy to the Andrew Vance Foundation, but I still held a substantial amount from Ted Harrington's quiet trust. Silas Thorne suggested I should buy a luxurious estate to fully enjoy my wealth. I refused. I don't need a castle. I need a safe house. I found a small, 2-bedroom house in the suburbs, near where Andrew and I had lived when we were first married. It had a small garden and a large reading room. It wasn't opulent, but it was warm and quiet. I called Chloe. I found a place. It has an empty room. Would you like to turn it into your art studio? Chloe cried on the phone. Mom, I can't take that. I need to rebuild myself. You will rebuild yourself, but you don't have to do it alone, I replied. This house isn't financial aid. It's an invitation for us to learn how to be a family again. I decided to use the remainder of the assets to establish the Eleanor Vance Fellowship, a smaller fund to provide grants for women over 50 seeking to return to education or start new careers after being emotionally or professionally sidelined. I was no longer just the heiress of Ted Harrington, nor the widow of Andrew Vance. I had become Eleanor Vance, a woman who transformed her pain and her silence into a legacy of recovery. I stood in my new home, smelling fresh paint and wood. For the first time in years, I felt belonging, not because of who I was or what I had, but because of how I chose to fight. I placed Andrew's hourglass on the mantel. It was now counting time, the time of peace. Chloe moved in with me in the quiet new house in the suburbs. The spare room I had prepared for her quickly transformed into a small, bright art studio, smelling of linseed oil and creativity. She had sold almost all her old belongings, bringing only her books, simple clothes, and her collection of dark charcoal sketches. Even though Julian was gone and we had reconciled verbally, living together was not easy. The silence between us now was different from the old silence. It wasn't betrayal, it was awkwardness, a mutual fear of touching the still tender wounds. We ate dinner together, but mostly exchanged short, functional sentences. Chloe maintained a safe distance, as if afraid she might hurt me again, or I might revert to judging her. One evening, as I was finishing up in the kitchen, Chloe walked in. She watched me for a moment, then mumbled, "Do you need any help, Mom?" "I'm fine. I can manage," I replied. Chloe clenched her hands, then burst out, "You don't have to say that! I know what I did! You don't have to treat me like a guest anymore!" I stopped washing the dishes and turned to face her. I knew this was the moment we had to face the deeper truth. "Chloe," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "You didn't help me for the 3 months I lived in your home, and you didn't speak a word when I was thrown out. You don't owe me a debt. You need to learn to be honest with yourself. That is the only way you can truly help me." Chloe started to cry. Not tears of fear, but tears of release from a heavy emotional burden. "I'm just afraid you still hate me. I'm afraid you'll never look at me the same way again." "I will always be your mother," I said, moving in to hold her. "But you must also be Chloe, the woman who doesn't surrender to fear." From that moment, I began to share with Chloe what I had learned. I called it the art of silence. We sat for hours in the reading room. I told her about those lonely nights in the terrible motel when the silence almost swallowed me whole. "Julian used your silence to control you. He made you believe that if you didn't speak up, everything would be fine. But I learned that silence has 2 sides. I explained to her. The first side is acquiescence, the silent complicity with evil. Like when you put that key on the table, it gives the other person control of your narrative. The second side, I continued, is composure. It's when you withhold your reaction, refusing to let anger or fear dictate your actions. That was the silence I used when Julian screamed at the press conference. It was the silence when I didn't answer your frantic phone calls." Chloe listened, her eyes wide with realization. She understood. "I used that silence to force Julian to self-destruct, and I used that silence to force you to find your own exit." Chloe's work in the studio began to change. Her charcoal sketches started incorporating color. The images of locked doors were replaced by drawings of a phoenix, the symbol of my trust, rising with vibrant wings. One afternoon, while Chloe was helping me sort through an old box, she found the handwritten letter I had written to Silas Thorne, the one that included the photocopy of my mother's watch. Chloe read it. She saw the sheer desperation, the humiliation I had endured. She understood that I had truly been on the brink of collapse. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking, "I never realized how much pain you were in. I thought you would always be okay. I thought you were strong." "I am strong," I said, meeting her gaze. "But strength is not the absence of being hurt. Strength is knowing how to rebuild after being broken. I had to learn to stand up alone because you were not there." "If I could go back to that night," Chloe pleaded, tears streaming down her face, "I would stand up. I would take that key and throw it at Julian, and I would take your hand, and we would leave together." I hugged her tightly. "You didn't do it that night, but you are doing it now. That is what matters most." Chloe made a final decision. She sold Julian's old apartment. She didn't need the money. She needed the final separation. She donated the proceeds to an organization that supported women starting small businesses. It was over. I had not just reclaimed my life. I had helped my daughter reclaim her soul. We were no longer mother and daughter divided by secrets and anger. We were 2 women who shared a painful lesson and were building a new future together. Time flowed gently, like a quiet stream. It had been over a year since the night I revealed my legacy and Julian vanished. My life and Chloe's had settled into a comfortable routine in our small, peaceful suburban home. The Andrew Vance Foundation was thriving. The money I committed had funded a state-of-the-art rehabilitation research lab, helping hundreds of people regain mobility after life-altering accidents. Every time I visited the lab, seeing the bright faces of the patients, I felt forgiveness spreading to a place I never thought possible. I was no longer the woman haunted by betrayal. I was the woman who had transformed her deepest pain into light for others. Chloe had excelled in her exams and was fully re-enrolled in university, pursuing design. Her studio in the house was now vibrant with color and positive energy. She no longer painted dark, charcoal sketches of despair. She painted open gateways and sunlit landscapes. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was honest. We still had silent evenings. But now, that silence was one of companionship, not hostility. One afternoon, Chloe sat with me, holding a cup of tea. "Do you ever think about Julian anymore?" she asked, her gaze steady. I took a breath. "Sometimes. I don't feel anger towards him anymore. He was a man who destroyed himself. He taught me a terrible lesson, and I used that lesson to help others." "Do you regret not using the money to buy a huge mansion?" I smiled. "This house, Chloe, is where I can sleep soundly every night. That is the biggest mansion money can buy." My work didn't stop with the foundation. I dedicated time to meeting the women who applied for the Eleanor Vance Fellowship. They were middle-aged women, discarded or needing to rebuild their lives after emotional upheaval. I listened to their stories. Stories of subtle, controlling partners, of children who chose the easier path. I saw the old Eleanor in their eyes, and it compelled me to act. I didn't give them money. I gave them validation. I remember one woman, Sarah, whose career was sabotaged by her ex-husband. She said, "I don't know where to start. I feel like I did everything wrong." I looked at Sarah, and I told her the one truth I had learned the hard way. The hardest forgiveness is not for the person who hurt you. It is for yourself, the one who allowed the hurt to happen. I had to forgive myself for trusting too much, for being silent too long, for prioritizing Julian's fragile ego for Chloe's sake. I had to forgive Andrew for keeping my father's secret. And ultimately, I had to forgive the mother who gave birth to me and then sent me away. That forgiveness liberated me. It made me realize that recovery isn't a straight line. It's the acceptance of the scars. A year later, Chloe secured a part-time job at an art gallery. She had new friends, a new life unobstructed by Julian's shadow. On my birthday, Chloe gave me a special gift. It was an oil painting. It wasn't of flowers or a landscape. It was a painting of the house key, the key of that fateful night. But in this painting, the key wasn't on a dinner plate. It was resting in the palm of a woman's hand, surrounded by vibrant light and tiny flowers. "Mom," Chloe said, her eyes full of love and respect. "This is the key. It's not a weapon anymore. It's a lesson. You taught me that silence isn't weakness. It's a strategy. You didn't use wealth to buy happiness. You used it to rebuild dignity." I held her close, feeling her warmth and her maturity. It was the moment I realized that my quiet retribution had served its ultimate purpose. I had won back my home, not with bricks and mortar, but with honesty and love. I no longer needed the Phoenix Trust or my secret identity. I had learned how to master my own narrative. My life had closed one chapter and gloriously opened another. I was Eleanor Vance, the woman who walked through fire and rose again. I was no longer afraid. I had my silence, and I had my daughter. And that was everything I needed. Chloe's betrayal gave Eleanor a death sentence, but Ted Harrington's secret gave her a chance at resurrection. What would you have done if you found out you were secretly a multimillionaire? Would you seek justice, or would you seek revenge? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, your story deserves to be heard. Send your truth to womenstories@segmail.com. Until next time, own your silence. It might be your greatest weapon.